Sarah had simply ceased to exist. One moment, she was a promising young lawyer, diligently working a pro bono case involving environmental violations by a shadowy corporation. The next, she was gone, and oh note, no trace, just an empty apartment and a growing sense of dread that settled over her friends and family like a shroud. The police investigation stalled quickly, hampered by dead ends and a distinct lack of cooperation from certain quarters. The quarters in question belonged to the Crimson Dragons, a brutal criminal syndicate that had woven itself into the very fabric of the city. They controlled everything from gambling dens and protection rackets to high-stakes corporate espionage. Whispers circulated that Sarah's case had stumbled too close to their interests, that she had unearthed something they couldn't allow to see the light of day. The whispers also mentioned how the Crimson Dragons deal with loose ends. Sarah wasn't just a lawyer. She was a key player in an upcoming witness protection program holding vital information that could cripple the syndicate's operations. Her disappearance wasn't just a silencing. It was a strategic move. The Crimson Dragons needed to find out what she knew, and they weren't known for their gentle methods. We find ourselves in a dimly lit interrogation room. The air hangs thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and fear. Sarah, bruised and battered, sits tied to a chair. Across from her, a man with eyes as cold as a winter storm smiles. Thinly, he speaks in a low, menacing voice, his words dripping with venom. He is known only as Silas, and he's the Crimson Dragon's chief interrogator. "Tell me, little bird," Silas purrs. "What did you uncover? What secrets did you steal from us?" Sarah remains silent, her gaze unwavering despite the pain etched on her face. She knows that any information she gives will be used to further their evil agenda. She is a lawyer, after all, and she knows the value of holding firm. Silas sighs dramatically. "Such a waste of potential that I do hate to resort to unpleasantries." He nods to two hulking figures standing behind Sarah. They step forward, their faces impassive, their intentions clear, but before they can act, a sudden tremor shakes the room. The lights flicker and die, plunging the interrogation chamber into darkness. A collective gasp rises from the guards, then, a single, sharp crack echoes through the room, followed by a grunt of pain. Chaos erupts. This is the world Sarah has been thrust into, a world of violence and shadows. A world where hope seems like a distant dream. But even in the darkest of nights, a flicker of light can ignite a revolution. And that light is about to arrive in the form of a certain Jason Statham. He is a man who doesn't play by the rules, a man who understands the language of the streets, and a man who will stop at nothing to bring Sarah back from the abyss. Before the chaos in the interrogation room could fully escalate, a figure materialized from the shadows. Not Statham. Not yet. This was merely a prelude, a taste of the storm to come. A lone operative, dispatched ahead to sow discord and create an opening. The sharp crack heard was the sound of a silenced pistol, expertly eliminating one of the guards. The grunt that followed was his partner, taken down with a swift, brutal move. These were professionals, operating with precision and lethal efficiency. They vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness, the seed of hope planted firmly in her heart. Meanwhile, across town, Jason Statham was busy. Not in a glamorous, high-stakes chase, but in a grimy, underground fight club. The air was thick with sweat, blood, and the roar of the crowd. Statham, his face a mask of concentration, moved with a controlled ferocity, dismantling his opponent with clinical precision. He wasn't fighting for money or glory, but for information, a debt owed, a favor to be called in. The fight ended swiftly, Statham emerging victorious, barely breaking a sweat. He collected his due, a name, a location, a whisper about a potential lead on a missing person. He didn't know it was Sarah yet, just another lost soul in a city teeming with them. But the name resonated with him, a faint echo of a past he thought he had buried as he stepped out of the fight club and into the rain-slick streets. His phone rang. It was Leo, his longtime contact and the man who usually kept him out of trouble. This time, however, Leo was bringing him right into the heart of it. "Jason," Leo's voice was tight with urgency. "We have a situation. A lawyer, Sarah Walker, disappeared a few days ago. She was working on a case that might be of interest to certain parties." Statham remained silent, listening intently. He already knew which parties Leo was referring to. The Crimson Dragons? A name that sent a chill down even his spine. The family is desperate, Leo continued. They've offered a substantial reward for her safe return, and I know you're not one for charity. But this one feels different. Something's not right. Statham paused, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He had walked away from this life, tried to build a new one. But the past always had a way of catching up, and the Crimson Dragons. They were a darkness that needed to be extinguished. What's the connection to me? Statham finally asked, his voice a low growl. She's got something they want, Leo replied. Something that could bring the whole damn syndicate down. And they think you might be the only one who can get her out. Statham considered this for a moment. That he wasn't a hero, just a man with a particular set of skills. But sometimes those skills were needed. And the thought of the Crimson Dragons tightening their grip on the city was enough to tip the scales. All right, Statham said, his voice resolute. Give me everything you have on Sarah Walker and the Crimson Dragons. I'm in. With Leo's intel downloaded onto a secure drive, Statham began his investigation. He started where most investigations do, at the beginning. Sarah's apartment. The police had already been through it, but Statham wasn't looking for evidence admissible in court. He was looking for clues, for anything that might tell him where the Crimson Dragons had taken her and, more importantly, why. The apartment was meticulously clean, almost sterile. Sarah was organized, efficient, and no signs of a struggle, which meant she likely went willingly or was taken by surprise. Statham focused on her workspace, the small desk crammed with legal documents and case files. He bypassed the obvious, the public records, and zeroed in on a hidden compartment in the desk drawer. Inside, he found a single, encrypted USB drive. Bingo! But accessing the drive wasn't going to be easy. The encryption was top tier, the kind used by corporations to protect their most sensitive data. Statham knew he couldn't crack it himself. That he needed help. That he paid a visit to Frankie Fingers Lombardo, a notorious hacker with a penchant for expensive whiskey and even more expensive gadgets. Frankie operated out of a cluttered workshop hidden beneath a laundromat, surrounded by blinking lights, tangled wires, and the constant hum of servers. Statham. Frankie greeted him, not looking up from his work. What brings you to my humble abode? Don't tell me you finally decided to embrace the digital age. I need you to crack this, Statham said, tossing the USB drive onto Frankie's workbench. Frankie picked it up, examining it with a magnifying glass. Military-grade encryption. Nasty. What's on it? That's what I need you to find out, Statham replied. It belongs to a missing woman. She was working on a case that pissed off the Crimson Dragons. Frankie whistled. The Dragons, huh? You're playing with fire, Statham. That's not a game for amateurs. I'm not an amateur, Statham said, his voice laced with a subtle threat. Just crack the drive, Frankie. I'll make it worth your while. Frankie grinned, his eyes glinting with avarice. All right. You always were good for business. Give me a few hours, and make sure that whiskey you bring next time is at least a 20-year vintage. While Frankie worked on the USB drive, Statham decided to pay a visit to some of his old contacts. He knew the Crimson Dragons had tentacles everywhere. From the docks to the police department, he needed to find someone who could give him an inside look, someone who knew where they might be holding Sarah. His first stop was a dingy bar on the edge of Chinatown, a place where secrets were traded like cheap liquor. He found his man, a greasy informant named Benny, the Ratley, huddled in a corner. Booth. Nursing a beer. Benny, Statham said, sliding into the booth opposite him. I need information. Sarah Walker. The Crimson Dragons. Benny's eyes darted around the room, his face etched with fear. You're asking for trouble, Statham. The Dragons don't like people poking around in their business. I'm not asking, Statham said, his hand resting on the table, a subtle but unmistakable threat. I'm telling. Where is she, Benny? Benny hesitated, his loyalty torn between self-preservation and the fear of crossing Statham. Finally, he cracked. I heard whispers. Something about an old warehouse down by the docks. Sector 7, they use it for special occasions. Sector 7 at IT was a start, and Statham knew exactly what kind of special occasions the Crimson Dragons were known for. He thanked Benny with a roll of bills and a silent promise of protection. Then, he set off towards the docks, ready to face whatever awaited him in the shadows. The docks were a labyrinth of shadowy alleys, rusted containers, and the constant lapping of waves against the crumbling concrete. Sector 7 was the most desolate part, a forgotten corner of the city where the Crimson Dragons could operate with impunity. Statham moved through the darkness like a ghost, his senses heightened, his every step deliberate. He didn't have to search long. The warehouse was a hulking monstrosity, its windows boarded up, its only entrance a heavy steel door guarded by two menacing figures. They were low-level thugs, muscle hired to keep unwanted visitors away. They weren't expecting Statham. "Hold it right there." One of them growled, stepping forward. "This is private property. You got business here." Statham didn't answer, he simply moved, a blur of motion too fast for the thugs to react. The first one went down with a single, brutal kick to the chest, collapsing onto the ground gasping for air. The second one managed to raise his gun, but Statham disarmed him in a flash, twisting the weapon out of his hand and using it to deliver a sharp blow to the man's temple. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The fight was over in seconds, a testament to Statham's skill and efficiency. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to get information. He dragged the unconscious thug into the shadows and began to question him, using methods that were far from gentle. "Where's Sarah Walker?" Statham demanded, his voice a low, menacing growl. The thug, groggy and terrified, stammered, I don't know what you're talking about." Statham tightened his grip on the man's arm, the pressure enough to elicit a scream of pain. "Don't play games with me that I know she's here. Tell me where she is, or things are going to get a lot worse for you." The thug finally broke, his fear outweighing his loyalty to the Crimson Dragons. She's in the back. In the office. Silas is with her." Silas? Statham remembered that name from Leo's intel. The Crimson Dragon's chief interrogator. He was running out of time. He left the thug unconscious and approached the steel door. It was locked, but Statham didn't waste time trying to pick it. He simply kicked it in, the force of the blow shattering the lock and sending the door crashing open. Inside, the warehouse was even more desolate than he had imagined. Rows of empty shelves stretched into the darkness, illuminated by a single bare bulb. Hanging from the ceiling, the air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. He could hear voices coming from the back of the warehouse. He followed the sound. His hand resting on the grip of his pistol, he reached the office, a small, cramped room with a single window overlooking the docks. Inside, he saw Sarah, still tied to a chair, her face bruised and bloodied. Silas stood over her, a cruel smile on his face. Well, Silas said, turning to face Statham. "Looks like we have a visitor. That I was wondering when you'd show up." Statham didn't say a word. He simply raised his pistol and fired. The bullet struck Silas in the shoulder, sending him staggering backward. "You shouldn't have come here," Silas snarled, clutching his wound. "This is my city. You don't belong here." "This isn't your city anymore," Statham said, his voice cold and deadly. "It's time for you and the Crimson Dragons to go down." The bullet had bought Statham some time, but he knew Silas wouldn't be down for long. He quickly untied Sarah, who was weak but conscious. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice urgent. Sarah nodded, wincing as she moved. "I think so." "What about Silas?" "He's the least of our problems," Statham replied, glancing at the doorway. He could hear the sounds of reinforcements arriving. "We need to get out of here." He grabbed Sarah's arm and led her out of the office, back into the main warehouse. The warehouse was no longer empty. Dozens of Crimson Dragons thugs, armed with guns and knives, were converging on their location. Statham knew they couldn't fight their way out. They needed a different approach. He spotted a loading dock at the far end of the warehouse. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to escape by sea. He pushed Sarah forward, using his body as a shield, firing his pistol at the approaching thugs. The bullets found their mark, dropping several of them to the ground. But there were simply too many as they neared the loading dock. A new obstacle presented itself. A police car, sirens blaring, screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse. Two officers emerged, their guns drawn. "Freeze! Police! Drop your weapons!" One of the officers shouted. Statham hesitated. He knew that engaging the police would only complicate matters, but he also knew that these officers were likely on the Crimson Dragon's payroll. He had seen it before, the Syndicate's influence extending into every corner of the city. "Don't do it, Statham," Sarah whispered, her voice strained. "They're not going to help us." Statham made his decision. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her towards a stack of crates, using them as cover. He knew that a firefight with the police was inevitable. "This is your last chance," the officer shouted. "Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up." Statham ignored him. He peeked around the corner of the crates, assessing the situation. The officers were positioned strategically, blocking their path to the loading dock. He needed to create a diversion. He tossed a smoke grenade towards the officers, creating a thick cloud of smoke that obscured their vision. Then, he grabbed Sarah and made a run for the loading dock, dodging bullets and weaving through the crates. The officers opened fire blindly into the smoke, their bullets tearing through the crates and ricocheting off the concrete floor. Statham and Sarah managed to reach the loading dock, but they were pinned down, with no way to escape. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the shadows. "Looks like you're in a bit of a bind, Statham." A figure emerged from the darkness, a man in a tailored suit, his face obscured by the shadows. It was Councilman Robert Thorne, a powerful politician with close ties to the Crimson Dragons. "I must say, I'm disappointed, Statham," Thorne said, his voice smooth and menacing. "I thought you were smarter than this. You should have known that you couldn't win. This city belongs to us." Statham glared at Thorne, his eyes filled with rage. "You're wrong, Thorne. This city belongs to the people, and they're going to take it back." Thorne chuckled. "Brave words, Statham. But words are cheap. Now, I'm going to give you one last chance. Hand over Sarah Walker, and I'll let you walk away. Otherwise," Thorne gestured to the police officers, who were now advancing towards them, their guns drawn. "Otherwise, you'll both die here." Statham didn't even hesitate. He knew Thorne wouldn't keep his word. He was just trying to manipulate him. "Go to hell, Thorne." Statham spat, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm not giving you anything." Thorne sighed dramatically. "Very well, Statham. You've made your choice." He nodded to the police officers, who immediately opened fire. Statham reacted instantly, diving behind a stack of crates and pulling Sarah down with him. The bullets tore through the crates, sending splinters flying. They were pinned down, outgunned and outnumbered. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a hulking man with a shaved head and a network of scars crisscrossing his face. He moved with a speed and agility that belied his size, taking down the police officers with brutal efficiency. This was Victor the Hammer Volkov, the Crimson Dragon's top enforcer. He was Thorne's personal bodyguard and a legend in the underworld, known for his unmatched strength and ruthlessness. Victor stood between Statham and the police officers, his massive frame a formidable barrier. "You want them, Thorne?" he growled, his voice like gravel. "You'll have to go through me." Thorne hesitated. He knew that Victor was loyal to him, but he also knew that Victor was unpredictable, a force of nature that couldn't be controlled. "Stand down, Victor," Thorne ordered, his voice tight with anger. "Let the police handle this." Victor ignored him. He turned to face Statham, his eyes filled with a cold, predatory hunger. "You're a worthy opponent, Statham," he said, his voice laced with respect. "But you're no match for me." Statham knew that Victor was right. He was outmatched, outgunned, and exhausted. But he couldn't give up. He had to protect Sarah. No matter the cost, he stood up, facing Victor head-on. "Let her go, Victor," he said, his voice resolute. "This doesn't have to end like this." Victor laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the warehouse. "You're a fool, Statham. There's no escape. This is the end of the line." He charged at Statham, his massive fists swinging like hammers. Statham dodged the first blow, but the second one caught him on the shoulder, sending him staggering backward. He knew he couldn't withstand Victor's onslaught for long. He needed to find a way to even the odds. He spotted a forklift parked nearby. It was a long shot, but it was his only chance. He dodged another blow and made a run for the forklift, leaping into the driver's seat and slamming his foot on the accelerator. The forklift roared to life, its metal forks rising menacingly. Victor turned to face the forklift, his eyes filled with amusement. "You think that little toy can stop me?" he sneered. "You're even more foolish than I thought." Statham didn't answer. He slammed the forklift into gear and charged at Victor, aiming the metal forks directly at his chest. Victor stood his ground, his arms outstretched, ready to meet the oncoming forklift head-on. The two titans collided, the force of the impact shaking the entire warehouse. The impact was earth-shattering, the forklift shuddered violently, its engine sputtering and dying. Victor, however, remained standing, though visibly shaken. He had braced himself against the forks, his immense strength preventing them from piercing his chest. But he was hurt, and his rage was now palpable. He ripped the forks from the forklift, tossing them aside like toys. Then he advanced on Statham, his eyes burning with fury. Statham knew he was in serious trouble. He was exhausted, injured, and outmatched. Victor unleashed a flurry of blows, each one more powerful than the last. Statham dodged and weaved, trying to avoid the worst of the assault. But he couldn't evade everything. A crushing blow to the ribs sent him sprawling to the ground. Gasping for air, Victor stood over him, his shadow looming large. "It's over, Statham," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You fought well, but you couldn't win." He raised his fist, ready to deliver the final blow. But before he could strike, a shot rang out. Victor staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Sarah had managed to grab a dropped gun and fired, giving Statham a brief reprieve. "Run, Statham!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "Get out of here!" Statham knew she was right. He couldn't help her if he was dead. He scrambled to his feet and stumbled towards the loading dock. Ignoring the pain searing through his body, he managed to reach the edge of the dock and leaped onto a small fishing boat, starting the engine and speeding away from the warehouse. He could see Victor standing on the dock, watching him go, his face a mask of fury as he sped away. He knew he had failed. He had lost Sarah, and he had underestimated the power of the Crimson Dragons. He needed to regroup, to heal, and to come up with a new plan. He limped to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of the city, a place where he could lie low and recover. He tended to his wounds, his mind racing, trying to piece together what had happened. He knew that Thorn was the key. He was the one pulling the strings, the one who had orchestrated everything. But why was he so determined to protect the Crimson Dragons? What was in it for him? As he lay in bed, nursing his wounds, he received a call from Frankie Fingers Lombardo. "Statham," Frankie said, his voice excited. "I cracked the USB drive. You're not going to believe what's on it." "What is it, Frankie?" Statham asked, his voice strained. "It's evidence, Statham," Frankie replied. "Evidence that could bring down the entire Crimson Dragon Syndicate. It's all here. Names, dates, locations, everything. But there's something else, Statham. Something even bigger." "What is it?" Statham pressed, his curiosity piqued. "It's proof that Thorn is involved," Frankie said. "He's been using the Crimson Dragons to launder money, to rig elections, to control the city. He's their puppet master, Statham. And he's about to make a big move." "What kind of move?" Statham asked, his heart pounding. "They're planning to consolidate their power," Frankie replied. "They're going to eliminate all their rivals, to seize control of the entire city. And they're going to do it tonight at a secret meeting at the Obsidian Club." The Obsidian Club. Statham knew that place. It was a high-end casino, a haven for the city's elite, and a notorious hub for criminal activity. It was the perfect place for the Crimson Dragons to consolidate their power. Statham knew what he had to do. He had to stop them, to expose Thorn, and to rescue Sarah. He was injured, exhausted, and outnumbered. But he couldn't give up. He had to fight, for Sarah, for the city, and for justice. The setback had provided him with the crucial information he needed. Now it was time to act. Statham knew he couldn't take on the Crimson Dragons and Thorn alone. He needed help, and he needed it fast. He remembered a name from Frankie's data. Isabella Izzy Rossi. She was a former accountant for the Crimson Dragons, a woman who knew the Syndicate's inner workings better than anyone. She had disappeared years ago, supposedly dead, but Frankie's files suggested she was still alive, living under an assumed identity in a remote part of the city. Finding Izzy wasn't easy. She had erased her tracks, living a quiet, unassuming life. But Statham was persistent, using his old contacts to track her down. He finally found her working as a waitress in a small diner, her face etched with weariness, her eyes haunted by the past. He approached her cautiously, knowing that she would be wary of strangers. "Isabella Rossi?" he asked, his voice low. She froze, her eyes widening with fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling. "You have the wrong person." "I know who you are, Izzy," Statham said. "I know about the Crimson Dragons. I know about Thorn." Her eyes darted around the diner, searching for an escape route. "Leave me alone," she pleaded. "I don't want anything to do with that life anymore." "I need your help, Izzy," Statham said. "They're planning something big tonight. They're going to consolidate their power, to take control of the entire city. I need your help to stop them." She hesitated, her face a battleground of fear and reluctance. "Why should I help you?" she asked. "What's in it for me?" "Justice, Izzy," Statham said. "A chance to finally put an end to the Crimson Dragons, to expose Thorn for who he really is. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to find some peace." She looked at him, her eyes searching his for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll help you. But you have to promise me that you'll protect me." Statham nodded. "I promise," he said. "I won't let anything happen to you." Izzy provided Statham with invaluable information about the Obsidian Club, the security protocols, the layout of the building, the location of the secret meeting room. She also gave him the names of key Crimson Dragons members who would be in attendance, including Victor the Hammer Volkov. "Victor will be Thorn's bodyguard," Izzy said. "He's incredibly dangerous. You need to be careful." "I know," Statham said. "I've already met him." Izzy also helped Statham gather resources. Weapons, ammunition, and a high-tech surveillance system that would allow them to monitor the Obsidian Club from a safe distance. With Izzy's help, Statham felt a glimmer of hope. He was still outnumbered and outgunned. But he now had a fighting chance. He had a plan, he had allies, and he had a burning desire to bring down the Crimson Dragons and rescue Sarah. The odds were still stacked against him, but he was ready to face whatever awaited him at the Obsidian Club. From a nondescript van parked across the street, Statham and Izzy meticulously studied the Obsidian Club. The casino glittered with opulence, a facade of legitimate business masking the criminal undercurrents that flowed beneath its surface. Izzy pointed out key security checkpoints, hidden cameras, and the likely patrol routes of the Crimson Dragons enforcers. "The main entrance is a fortress," Izzy explained, her voice low. "Too many guards. Too many cameras. We need to find another way in." Statham nodded, his eyes scanning the building. "What about the service entrance?" "Deliveries, staff access." Izzy shook her head. "Heavily guarded. They know that's a potential weak point." They spent hours poring over blueprints of the Obsidian Club, searching for a vulnerability. Finally, Izzy pointed to a small, unmarked room on the lower level. "The old boiler room," she said. "It's been out of commission for years. The entrance is hidden behind a false wall in the basement. It's a long shot, but it might be our best bet." Statham considered the plan. The boiler room was a risky option, but it offered the element of surprise. "All right," he said. "That's how we'll do it. We'll infiltrate the Obsidian Club through the boiler room." They spent the next few hours meticulously planning their infiltration. Izzy provided Statham with detailed instructions on how to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the lower levels, avoiding security cameras and guards. She also gave him a list of code words and passwords that would allow him to blend in with the staff. "The secret meeting room is on the top floor," Izzy said. "It's heavily guarded, but I know a back entrance that might be less secured. It leads to a private elevator that goes directly to the meeting room." Statham studied the blueprints, memorizing the layout of the building. He knew that every detail was crucial, that one wrong move could jeopardize the entire mission. "What about Sarah?" Statham asked, his voice filled with concern. Do you know where they might be holding her? Izzy hesitated. I'm not sure, she said. But I heard whispers that they might be keeping her in a private suite on the 3rd floor. It's reserved for VIP guests. And it's heavily guarded. Statham nodded. I'll find her, he said, his voice resolute. I promise you, Izzy. I'll bring her back. They discussed their strategy for rescuing Sarah, knowing that it would be the most dangerous part of the mission. They decided that Statham would infiltrate the Obsidian Club alone, while Izzy remained in the van, providing surveillance and support. If anything goes wrong, Izzy said, her voice trembling. Get out of there. Statham, don't risk your life for me. I'm not leaving you, Izzy, Statham said. We're in this together. We're going to bring down the Crimson Dragons, and we're going to rescue Sarah. I promise you, we're going to make it through this. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Statham prepared for his infiltration. He checked his weapons, his ammunition, and his communication devices. He was ready to face whatever awaited him at the Obsidian Club. He looked at Izzy, her face etched with fear and determination. Are you ready? He asked. Izzy nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Let's do this, Statham, she said. Let's bring down the Crimson Dragons. Statham slipped into the shadows, approaching the Obsidian Club with the stealth of a seasoned predator. He found the hidden entrance to the boiler room exactly where Izzy said it would be, behind a loose panel in the basement wall. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky pipe that he moved cautiously, his senses on high alert, navigating the maze of rusty pipes and crumbling machinery. Izzy's instructions were precise, guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors of the lower levels. He avoided security cameras, slipping past patrolling guards, his every movement calculated and deliberate. He reached the first checkpoint, a dimly lit hallway guarded by 2 Crimson Dragons thugs. They were armed and alert, their eyes scanning the shadows. Statham knew he couldn't avoid them, he had to take them down. Quickly and silently, he used a distraction, tossing a small rock down the hallway, drawing their attention. As they turned to investigate, he sprang into action, moving with lightning speed. He silenced them with brutal efficiency, using a combination of hand-to-hand combat and close-quarters gunplay. He continued his ascent, reaching the main casino floor. The opulence of the Obsidian Club was on full display, the air filled with the clatter of slot machines, the murmur of conversations, and the clinking of glasses. He blended in with the crowd, his face impassive, his eyes scanning the room. For any sign of Sarah, he reached the private elevator that Izzy had told him about, a discreet entrance tucked away in a secluded corner of the casino. He used the code word that Izzy had provided, gaining access to the elevator as the doors closed. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The elevator ascended rapidly, carrying him towards the top floor and the secret meeting room. He knew that he was walking into a trap, but he had no choice. He had to stop Thorn and rescue Sarah, no matter the cost. The elevator doors opened, revealing a lavishly decorated hallway, guarded by a contingent of Crimson Dragons enforcers. They were expecting him. Statham. One of the enforcers said, his voice cold and menacing. We've been waiting for you. Statham didn't say a word, he simply drew his weapons and opened fire. The hallway erupted in a hail of bullets, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The initial stealth was gone, replaced by a chaotic and violent firefight. Statham moved with a controlled ferocity, taking down the enforcers with clinical precision. He used cover and concealment to his advantage, dodging bullets and returning fire with deadly accuracy. He fought his way down the hallway, reaching the entrance to the secret meeting room. He could hear voices inside, the sounds of Thorn and the Crimson Dragons finalizing their plans. He kicked down the door and stormed into the meeting room, his weapons blazing. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to face him. The final confrontation had begun. Thorn stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of cold fury. Around him, the Crimson Dragons leaders looked up in shock, their faces a mixture of anger and fear. Statham's entrance had shattered their carefully laid plans. You shouldn't have come here, Statham, Thorn said, his voice laced with venom. This was your last chance to walk away. Statham ignored him. His eyes scanning the room, he saw Sarah, bound and gagged, sitting in a corner, guarded by two heavily armed thugs. He knew he had to reach her, but first, he had to deal with Thorn and his enforcers. "Let her go, Thorn," Statham said, his voice resolute. "This doesn't have to end like this." Thorn laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You're a fool, Statham. You think you can stop us? We control this city, that you're just a one-man army." Suddenly, Viktor the Hammer Volkov stepped forward, his massive frame filling the doorway. He glared at Statham, his eyes burning with a predatory hunger. "I've been waiting for this, Statham," Viktor said, his voice like gravel. "I want my rematch." Thorn nodded, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Take him down, Viktor," he ordered. "Make an example of him." Viktor charged at Statham, his fists swinging like hammers. Statham dodged the first blow, but the second one connected, sending him staggering backward. The fight was on. Viktor was a force of nature, his strength and speed unmatched. Statham was skilled and resourceful, but he was also exhausted and injured. He knew he was in for the fight of his life. They traded blows, the air filled with the sounds of grunts, groans, and the shattering of furniture. Statham used every trick in the book, dodging, weaving, and countering with lightning-fast strikes. But Viktor was relentless, his attacks unyielding. Statham managed to land a few solid blows, but they barely seemed to faze Viktor. He was like a brick wall, absorbing the punishment and continuing to press forward. The fight spilled out of the meeting room, into the hallway, and onto the casino floor. The patrons scattered in terror, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. The Obsidian Club had transformed from a haven of opulence into a battleground. Statham and Viktor continued to fight, their bodies battered and bruised. They were both nearing their limits, their movements growing slower, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Finally, Statham saw an opening. He dodged a wild swing from Viktor and countered with a swift kick to the knee, sending the enforcer stumbling. He followed up with a series of rapid punches to the face, staggering Viktor further. Viktor roared in pain and rage. His eyes filled with a murderous fury. He lunged at Statham, grabbing him in a bear hug, squeezing the life out of him. Statham struggled to break free, but Viktor's grip was too strong. He was losing consciousness, his vision blurring. He knew he had to do something, anything, to escape. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife, plunging it into Viktor's side. The enforcer roared in pain. Releasing his grip, Statham used the opportunity to break free, staggering backward. Gasping for air, Viktor clutched his side, his face contorted. With pain, he glared at Statham, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and respect. "You're a worthy opponent, Statham," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But you can't win. I'm too strong." Statham staggered forward, his body screaming in protest. "It's not about strength, Viktor," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's about will. And I have the will to stop you, no matter what it takes." He charged at Viktor, his eyes burning with determination. He knew that this was his last chance. He had to defeat Viktor, or everything would be lost. Viktor crumpled to the floor, defeated. Statham, battered and bruised, turned his attention back to Thorn, who watched the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and disbelief. The remaining Crimson Dragon's leaders, realizing the tide had turned, began to scatter, attempting to escape the Obsidian Club. Statham ignored them, his focus solely on Thorn. He approached the councilman, his every step deliberate, his eyes burning with a cold, unwavering determination. "It's over, Thorn," Statham said, his voice hoarse. "Your reign of terror is over." Thorn scoffed, his face a mask of defiance. "You think you've won, Statham? You haven't seen anything yet. I have resources you can't even imagine." "I know all about your resources, Thorn," Statham said. "I know about the money laundering, the election rigging, the control you exert over the city. It all ends tonight." He gestured to Sarah, who was still bound and gagged in the corner. "Why, Thorn? Why did you have to involve her? What did she ever do to you?" Thorn hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape route. "She knew too much, Statham," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She was going to expose everything. I had no choice. Expose what, Thorn? Statham pressed, his curiosity piqued. What was so important that you were willing to kill for it? Thorn sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. It's not just about the money, Statham, he said. It's about power, control. The Crimson Dragons gave me everything I ever wanted. They made me who I am today. And who is that, Thorn? Statham asked. A puppet? A pawn in their game. I was more than that, Thorn insisted. I was their leader. I was the one calling the shots. You're lying, Thorn, Statham said. You were never in charge. You were just a tool used to further their agenda. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the shadows, a voice that sent a chill down Statham's spine. You're right, Statham. Thorn was never in charge. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man with a calm, composed demeanor, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating intelligence. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his appearance suggesting wealth and power. I am, the man said, his voice smooth and commanding. I am the true leader of the Crimson Dragons. Statham stared at the man, his mind reeling. He had never seen him before, but he knew instantly that this was the real power behind the Syndicate. Who are you? Statham asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, a chillingly pleasant expression. My name is irrelevant, Statham, he said. What matters is that I control everything. The Crimson Dragons, the city, everything. He gestured to Sarah, his eyes filled with a cold, predatory hunger. She was a threat to my operation, Statham, he said. She knew too much. I had to silence her. But why? Statham pressed, his curiosity burning. What was she investigating? What secrets did she uncover? The man paused, considering his words carefully. She discovered the truth about the corporation, he said. The corporation that funds the Crimson Dragons. The corporation that controls this city. What's the name of the corporation? Statham asked, his voice barely audible. The man smiled, a chillingly sinister expression. The corporation is called Phoenix Rising. The revelation hung in the air, thick with tension. Phoenix Rising. Statham knew instinctively that this was the key to everything, the source of the Crimson Dragon's power and influence. But he had no time to dwell on it. The leader of the Syndicate was standing before him, and he was clearly not going to let Statham leave alive. You know too much, Statham, the leader said, his voice devoid of emotion. I can't allow you to expose Phoenix Rising. You're a loose end that needs to be tied up. He gestured to the remaining Crimson Dragon's enforcers, who immediately moved to surround Statham. The odds were stacked against him, but he refused to back down. He had come too far, sacrificed too much. He wasn't going to let this monster win. It's over, Statham, the leader said, his eyes filled with a cold, predatory hunger. Prepare to die. The enforcers charged, their weapons blazing. Statham reacted instantly, dodging and weaving, returning fire with deadly accuracy. He was outnumbered. But he was also more skilled, more determined. He fought his way through the enforcers. His movements a blur of motion, his every strike precise and lethal. He used cover and concealment to his advantage, taking down the enforcers one by one, their bodies collapsing to the floor in a heap. The leader watched the scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and frustration. He had underestimated Statham's abilities. He was clearly a force to be reckoned with. Finally, Statham stood alone, facing the leader of the Crimson Dragons. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood, the silence broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. You're a formidable opponent, Statham, the leader said, his voice laced with respect. But you're no match for me. I control this city. I control everything. You control nothing, Statham retorted, his voice hoarse. Your time is up. He charged at the leader, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. The leader was skilled in combat, but he was no match for Statham's raw power and determination. They traded blows, the air filled with the sounds of grunts, groans, and the impact of flesh against flesh. Statham unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks, staggering the leader. The leader fought back, landing a few solid blows, but Statham refused to be deterred. He pressed the attack, his relentless assault, overwhelming the leader. Finally, Statham saw an opening. He dodged a wild swing from the leader and countered with a swift kick to the head, sending him sprawling to the floor. The leader lay motionless, his eyes glazed over, his body battered and bruised. Statham stood over him, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. "It's over," Statham said, his voice barely audible. "You've lost." He turned his attention to Sarah, who was still bound and gagged in the corner. He rushed to her side, untying her bonds and removing the gag from her mouth. "Are you all right?" Statham asked, his voice filled with concern. Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "I'm okay," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Statham. You saved me." Statham smiled, a weary but genuine expression. "We're not out of here yet," he said. "We need to get out of this place now." He helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her as they made their way out of the meeting room, leaving the defeated leader of the Crimson Dragons behind. The final confrontation was over, and Statham had emerged victorious. With Sarah by his side, Statham fought his way out of the Obsidian Club, the casino now a chaotic scene of destruction and panic. The remaining Crimson Dragons enforcers, disorganized and demoralized by the loss of their leader, offered little resistance. They reached the back entrance where Statham had disabled the security cameras earlier. As they stepped outside, they were met with a barrage of gunfire. Reinforcements had arrived, alerted to the chaos within the casino. Statham pulled Sarah behind a parked car, using it as cover. He knew they couldn't stay there for long. They were trapped, surrounded by enemy forces. Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled over the radio. "Statham, this is Izzy. I've got a car waiting for you around the corner. Go, go, go." Statham grabbed Sarah's hand and sprinted towards the designated location, dodging bullets and weaving through the parked cars. They reached the car, a beat-up sedan, its engine running. Izzy was behind the wheel, her face etched with anxiety. They jumped into the car, Izzy slamming her foot on the accelerator. The car screeched away from the Obsidian Club, pursued by a fleet of Crimson Dragons vehicles. A high-speed chase ensued, the cars racing through the streets of the city, their engines roaring, their tires squealing. Statham leaned out the window, firing his weapons at the pursuing vehicles, disabling several of them. Izzy navigated the streets with skill and precision, using her knowledge of the city to evade the pursuing vehicles. They dodged roadblocks, jumped medians, and narrowly avoided collisions. Finally, they reached a safe house that Izzy had prepared, a remote cabin in the woods, far from the reach of the Crimson Dragons. They barricaded the doors and windows, preparing to defend themselves against any potential attackers. They waited, their nerves on edge, their senses on high alert, but no one came. The Crimson Dragons had been defeated, their leadership decimated, their organization in disarray. They had reached safety, but Statham knew that the Syndicate's influence would still linger. Phoenix Rising was still out there, its power and resources vast and unknown. "It's not over, is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "They're still out there, aren't they?" Statham nodded, his face grim. "They are," he said. "But we'll be ready for them. We'll expose Phoenix Rising, and we'll bring them to justice." He looked at Sarah, her face etched with weariness but also with a newfound sense of determination. She had been through hell, but she had emerged stronger, more resilient. "Thank you, Statham," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved my life. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Statham smiled, a weary but genuine expression. "You don't have to repay me," he said. "Just stay safe and help me bring down Phoenix Rising." They were safe, for now, but the fight was far from over. The Crimson Dragons may have been defeated, but Phoenix Rising was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its opportunity to strike, and Statham knew that he would be ready. He would be waiting. The next few days were spent in the relative safety of the cabin, tending to wounds, both physical and emotional. Statham ensured that Sarah was provided with the best possible care, arranging for a doctor to visit the cabin discreetly. He also worked tirelessly with Izzy and Frankie, sifting through the data recovered from the USB drive, piecing together the puzzle of Phoenix Rising. They discovered that Phoenix Rising was a multinational corporation, involved in a wide range of illicit activities, from money laundering and arms trafficking to drug smuggling and political corruption. They had tentacles everywhere, their influence reaching into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. Exposing Phoenix Rising would be a monumental task, one that would require a coordinated effort from multiple agencies and individuals. Statham knew that he couldn't do it alone. He contacted Leo, his longtime contact, providing him with the evidence they had gathered. Leo, shocked by the scope of Phoenix Rising's operations, vowed to use his connections to bring the corporation to justice. "This is bigger than anything I've ever seen, Jason," Leo said, his voice grave. "But I promise you, I'll do everything I can to help. We'll expose these bastards for who they are." Statham also contacted Sarah's family, informing them that she was safe and recovering. They were overjoyed to hear the news, their gratitude boundless. With Sarah's safety ensured and the wheels of justice set in motion, Statham turned his attention to any remaining loose ends. He knew that there were still Crimson Dragon's enforcers at large, remnants of the Syndicate that could pose a threat to Sarah and Izzy. He tracked them down, one by one, using his skills and resources to eliminate them. He wasn't a hero, but he was a protector, and he wasn't going to allow anyone to harm those he cared about. As the dust settled, Statham found himself standing on a precipice, looking out at the city he had fought so hard to protect. He had brought down the Crimson Dragons, rescued Sarah, and exposed the truth about Phoenix Rising. But he knew that the fight was far from over. He had made enemies, powerful enemies, who would stop at nothing to silence him. He knew that he would always be looking over his shoulder, ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He looked at Sarah, who stood beside him, her eyes filled with a newfound sense of strength and resilience. She had changed. He could see it in her face, in her demeanor. She was no longer the naive lawyer he had rescued from the Crimson Dragons. She was a survivor, fighter, a woman who was ready to take on the world. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Statham smiled, a weary but genuine expression. "Now," he said, we fight for justice, we fight for truth, and we fight for a better world. We fight until there's nothing left to fight for." He paused, his eyes scanning the horizon. "And we never give up." As they stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun, a new threat emerged from the shadows. A figure approached, a woman with a cold, calculating intelligence, her eyes burning with a fiery determination. "I'm here to talk about Phoenix Rising," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "I have information that could help you bring them down. But it comes at a price." Statham looked at Sarah, then back at the woman, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He knew that this was just the beginning. The fight had just begun. ***, the end. Or is it?